Our next speaker will be discussing digital trust. With over 25 years experience in the cyber and information security space, he was the head of cyber and space for the Ministry of Defence in the UK prior to joining KPMG. He is currently the global head of cyber innovation KPMG UK and leads the cyber team on technical strategies that help clients deal with high-end threats. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Ferbrache.
Digital trust. I've got some slides to take you through, but what I'd like to do is to take you on a journey and talk a bit about organized crime and what organized crime means in this very different world that Peter, Boy, Adrian have brought to mind. So what I'd like to start with is some statistics and a view of what this digital world might look like and the implications for security in that world. And I'd like to try and illustrate why digital trust matters so much. And when I look at Africa, it's a buoyant, innovative, youthful continent. And $118 billion digital economy, growing to $150 billion projected by 2025. And it's a surprising economy. So if I looked at areas such as the mobile money market, I would find 70% of global transactions dealt with through sub-Saharan Africa. That's $700 billion of a $1 trillion marketplace. So some amazing statistics that illustrate just how very, very different Africa can be when it harnesses that potential. So we did a global survey on digital trust. We surveyed 1,880 executives worldwide on the topic to try and get some insights as to what was really bothering them, what was worrying them. And we found some things, some unsurprising, but some worth probing and exploring. So over the next 3 years, unsurprisingly, the firms we surveyed were ramping up their investment in IoT, Edge, 5G, and to a lesser extent, exploiting the virtual and augmented reality environments and the potential downstream of Web 3.0 that Peter has brought to life so well in his metaverse presentation. So that potential, that brings new security challenges. And a lot of my time is spent dealing with organized crime. And that's become a major economy and a major industry. An industry of the scale of $1 trillion currently globally. And that gets people's attention in terms of the patterns of criminality, the impact that has on the economy, and also on national security. And that's a challenge. So if I look at this changing world over the next 3 years, with this ramp up, what are we seeing? Well, the IoT piece is interesting. So we're looking at about 12 billion IoT devices, and we're going to see a major explosion in the number of connected devices. That opens up new collection of personal data, new ways of interacting with the digital environment, and potentially new attack surfaces for organized crime as well. That feels very, very different, and it's making people think again about the nature of digital infrastructure and their dependency on that infrastructure. As we move into virtual reality and augmented reality, we sense that the world may also change in terms of patterns of crime. In a virtual reality environment, we're all just beginning to think through the ethical implications of collecting personal data, of misrepresenting yourself with avatars in that environment, of what theft actually means, of non-fungible tokens and digital assets, and of what crime may actually look like in that environment. What's the implications of assault in a virtual reality environment? So all of this is new territory for organizations working through the implications around digital trust. We also know that a majority of firms have engaged in more extensive data collection and analysis of customer data. No surprise, sophisticated analytics, extracting the maximum value from the comprehensive data we now collect and process on customer transactions and interactions. And as Adrian hinted, most businesses now regard that as a core asset for their business. So an example, to give you one, if I looked at a large-scale ransomware attack, extortion, on Maersk as a global shipping firm, the one thing that strikes you about Maersk sometimes is they're a data firm. Their business value is in the data they have on customer transactions, shipping movements, stock holdings, and transit. And that's the piece that they can extract extra additional business value from. So we're seeing this model where data is at the heart, infrastructureless firms, but also is a target for extortion and manipulation. We talked a bit about platforms. 61% we surveyed will be embracing new disruptive tech platforms within the next 2 years. That's worth pondering. And we're dealing with securing a very, very different environment now. An environment which is becoming hyper-connected and integrated with sophisticated APIs, application programming interfaces, linking together ecosystems. And that has become a very different style of economy. And of course, we're beginning to see the manipulation of those dependencies by organized crime, so-called supply chain attacks. And that raises new concerns. It also means as a community, we need to do more to protect and defend that environment. 78%, this is one that struck me and gave me pause for thought. 78% agree that the adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning brings some unique cybersecurity challenges. And that's worth pausing. Everybody we surveyed was looking at the potential of sophisticated machine learning. And those machine learning algorithms increasingly are interacting directly with us in the real world. So more bots, more conversational interactions, more data, more opportunities to learn from the interaction between machine and person. And in that environment, security issues become very different. We have to deal with how is that machine learning algorithm trained? What data did you use? What biases did you include within that when you did it? Are you using it in a way that matches what it can be trained to do? Or are you using it outside the parameters that it's expected and is being trained to deal with? Is it drifting over time as it interacts with people, with individuals, as it carries on potentially learning and adapting its environment? So, and can it be manipulated? And there's a whole field of threats we call adversarial AI, which is all about the ways in which you might interact with the AI or machine learning model to be able to extract information, to understand how it was trained, how it makes certain decisions, how you can maneuver or manipulate that AI. And we're seeing this as a big area for regulatory action now. So next year, the European Union puts in place the first AI regulations linked to some G20 principles about the ethical and responsible use of artificial intelligence. And those set out a framework to allow us to be confident in the way that those artificial intelligence algorithms are employed for the common good. And in doing that, they'll exclude, or at the very least license, certain categories of AI. An example would be facial recognition from closed-circuit TV camera imagery at scale in public environments. Another example would be behavioral manipulation by AI, where they can learn and they can begin to nudge people's behaviors and interactions. And that feels very, very different indeed. So big concerns over the adoption of artificial intelligence. And why does all of this matter? It matters because if we're providing services into the US, into Europe, but actually globally, we need to start thinking through the privacy, the ethics of adopting some of these new technologies and moving into this brave new world that Peter set out. A very, very different world in the metaverse and Web 3.0. So that feels very different. So a lot of what I'm interested in is digital trust and what it means in this environment for the future. And that's worth pausing to think about, because we'll all be engaging in a public discussion and a regulatory discussion about the way we safeguard public interests and promote attention to digital trust in that environment. And if I move on, 80% of the people who responded recognize this. They can sense the growing regulatory interest. They can sense the growing public debates around this and the need to be prepared and ready to deal with that. And part of that is also about transparency. So what data are you collecting on individuals, maybe even business partners? And how do you use that data to good effect? And where's it processed? Where's it transmitted? All of these principles are at the heart of the first generation of privacy legislation. And we now have over 150 countries in the world who adopted a privacy framework of some form. Many countries are now moving on to the second generation of that framework. And that means being clearer about the nature and constraints on the way that information is handled, but also the rights of individuals in understanding how their data is being collected, processed, and managed. And possibly, as part of this world that's been set out before, how they get transactional value out of that as well. A return on their willingness to share that data. And the markets around that are still immature and still developing. But the components are beginning to drop into place that might allow that. So good to see the recognition, but a long way to go to get to the final position. And then 36% of respondents are worried. And they're worried because they see the regulation landscape changing and changing quickly. And that comes in not just privacy, but it comes on critical infrastructure protection, because we're more and more dependent now on digital infrastructure in ways that we're just beginning to realize. So a lot of countries I deal with had regulations around energy, transport, finance, those key sectors that everybody said my economy depends on. If this is disrupted and impacted, I have problems. But increasingly, they're extending that to cover digital infrastructure. And that digital infrastructure can be surprising. So it's not just the classic internet exchanges, root domain name servers, search engines. It's now beginning to extend to bring more and more of that digital world we depend on in scope. And that feels very, very different. So that's the landscape. It's changing. But the thing I always encourage people to do is I have to deal with organized crime. I have to deal with nation states, all of whom are interested in projecting power, and in the case of criminals, exploiting and making money through fraud, through extortion, through blackmail. And as we change our world, they change their world too. And an example of this is all of the discussions we've had about cash out using cryptocurrencies for organized crime, and the way we regulate that world, the way we have traceability and accountability for transactions and interactions. So what is this thing called digital trust? I've talked a lot about it, but I haven't actually defined it yet. So this is a definition. It's actually one that the World Economic Forum are in the process of adopting. And it's worth pausing on to think about for a second. The confidence that stakeholders, that's a broad group. So customers, clients, business partners too. Harden your ability to protect their interests and uphold the broader piece, societal expectations and values. Okay. So this is something that's very, very, very closely linked to brand and reputation. And increasingly, it's linked to the license to operate. And an example would be if you provide services into the European Union just now, that's covered by the General Data Protection Regulation, even though you're outside Europe. And we're seeing a lot more extraterritorial regulation and legislation dropping in. So that's digital trust. It makes you stop, think more broadly about who your stakeholders are, what they trust you to do, and how you bring together an integrated view about how you protect and honor the trust they place in you. So if I move to look at that quickly, this trust piece is important because it drives better customer retention and improved profitability. Came through very, very clearly on our survey. And there's some component parts to that. One, security and reliability. I've majored a lot on this, making sure that your technology and data is well protected and operating as you expect as well. So you can provide assurance to your stakeholders that their data that you hold in trust. To finish this section then, so I wanted to also just cover two last pieces, which is inclusive, ethical and responsible use. And for me, that really covers your willingness to protect and honor the trust placed in your organization. And accountability and oversight for me is being very, very clear on responsibilities within your organization and who's responsible for maintaining and respecting digital trust and putting in place the right governance and oversight structures around that. So you've got a section here which links together many disciplines of cybersecurity, safety, privacy, but into a very accountable environment. That's digital trust. Think broadly, think widely. And this has been a focus for the World Economic Forum. So some of you may have seen a paper produced November time, earlier this month, on earning digital trust, decision-making for trustworthy technologies. And that's going to be one of the themes that plays through with the World Economic Forum in Davos. And they'll be adopting a model that's very comprehensive and seeking to encourage businesses to think broadly about digital trust, what it means to you and to your stakeholders, and why it's important to brand and to reputation. So my message is a very simple one. We focus a lot on cybersecurity and privacy. Step back a level. Think more strategically about digital trust, what it means, the value to your organization of building and retaining and being transparent around that. So thank you very much, everybody.